The Diary of Anne Frank is a deeply human account of how a teenager lived through a terrible period of war and persecution. In this video, we have selected 10 of the most emotional moments from her moving story. 1. The birthday present. The birthday present that Anne Frank received on June 12, 1942, a red and white checkered diary, became much more than a simple notebook to record thoughts. For Anne, this diary, which she affectionately called Kitty, was an emotional refuge during one of the most tumultuous periods of her life. From the moment she received the diary, Anne demonstrated a deep desire to confide her thoughts and feelings to it, recognizing the need for a confidant she could fully trust. In her first entry, she wrote, "I hope I shall be able to confide in you completely, as I have never been able to do in anyone before, and I hope that you will be a great support and comfort to me." This passage from Anne Frank's diary is a touching testimony of a young girl who, despite her vivacity and energy, was deeply affected by the extraordinary circumstances of her life. The need for a confidant to share her most intimate thoughts is a testament to the psychological and emotional pressure that Anne faced daily. This simple diary became a symbol of her ability to seek hope and comfort in times of suffering. Anne received her diary in a context of growing tension and insecurity. She and her family had already fled Germany to the Netherlands for fear of the Nazis. In 1942, the Nazi occupation in the Netherlands was in full force, and anti-Semitic laws were increasingly restricting the lives of Jews. The Frank family, already facing the constant fear of persecution, was preparing to go into hiding. Anne's 13th birthday was a rare moment of celebration amidst this bleak scenario. Otto Frank, her father, aware of the need to provide some comfort and normalcy to his daughter, gave her the diary. It was a simple gift, but with profound significance, as it offered Anne a means of escape and expression in an increasingly dangerous world. 2. The move to the hiding place. The move to the hiding place was a decisive and extremely tense moment in the lives of Anne Frank and her family. On July 5, 1942, Margot Frank, Anne's sister, received a summons to report to a labor camp, a clear sign that the danger was approaching rapidly. Otto Frank, realizing the imminent threat of the Nazis, decided that the family should go into hiding immediately. The move, initially planned for a later date, was hastened abruptly and filled with urgency. On July 6, 1942, the Frank family left their apartment and headed to the hiding place, a secret annex located behind Otto's office in Amsterdam. Anne's account of this move is marked by a mix of fear and confusion. She described how the family dressed in several layers of clothing to avoid carrying suitcases and attracting suspicion, and how they left most of their belongings behind. Anne wrote in her diary, "It feels as if years have passed between Sunday and now. So much has happened, it feels as if the world is turned upside down. But I am still alive, Kitty, and that's what matters," says Daddy. The journey to the annex was tense in the rain, although Anne noted seeing people who wanted to offer them a ride but couldn't due to the yellow stars they wore. Upon arriving at the annex, they were greeted by Miep Guess and other friends who would help them survive for the next 2 years. The transition to life in confinement marked the beginning of a new and difficult phase in Anne's life, where freedom was traded for precarious security. Inside the annex, adapting to the new reality was a constant challenge. The space was small and claustrophobic, and the need for absolute silence during the day to avoid detection made life even more difficult. Anne, with her characteristic vivacity, struggled to maintain a sense of normalcy and hope amidst the confinement. In her diary, she describes the arrival at the hiding place. Mommy and Margot were not in a condition to lift a finger. They threw themselves onto the unmade beds, exhausted, feeling miserable, and who knows what else. But the two housekeepers of the family, Daddy and I, immediately set to work. We spent the entire day unpacking boxes and arranging closets, hammering and cleaning until we were exhausted. We didn't eat anything hot all day, but we didn't care. Mommy and Margot didn't eat because they were too tired and nervous, and Daddy and I because we were too busy. 3 tensions in the secret annex. Life in the secret annex was marked by constant tensions among its occupants, an inevitable situation given the forced proximity and the continuous pressure of external danger. Anne Frank described a particularly tense episode on September 27, 1942, when Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan had a violent fight. Anne wrote, "I've never seen anything like it in my life. Mommy and Daddy would never dream of shouting at each other like that. And the reason was so trivial that it was all a waste of breath." This conflict highlighted how, even in the midst of persecution, there was room for division among the families in hiding. Daily frustrations were amplified by the lack of space and privacy, leading to frequent misunderstandings. Anne mentioned that Mrs. Van Daan was constantly at odds with her mother, Edith Frank, over trivial issues such as the use of sheets and dishes. "Things are starting to get ugly between Mommy and Mrs. Van Daan too, and there's reason for it," wrote Anne, highlighting how even the smallest domestic problems could trigger major disputes. Anne also reported her own difficulty in relating to the Van Daans and how conflicts among the adults affected Peter, the Van Daan's son, who often became a target of criticism for being considered lazy and hypochondriac. Despite the tensions, there were moments of interaction and attempts at peaceful coexistence. Anne frequently visited the Van Daan's quarters where they would chat and eat cookies. She described how Peter was often the target of jokes because of his peculiarities, but also noted that occasionally there were attempts at understanding and maintaining a certain normalcy. "Yesterday we talked about Peter. I told them that he has the habit of caressing my face, and that I would like him to stop," wrote Anne. There was a tremendous effort to maintain some civility in that already hostile condition for all those hiding in the secret annex. 4. The cat MOFFI. Anne Frank and Peter Van Daan developed a deep emotional relationship with MOFFI, the cat that kept them company in the secret annex. From the beginning, MOFFI became a central figure in the hideout, providing significant emotional comfort for the young people. Anne recounts several situations where MOFFI was present, such as when he played with Peter and Anne, relieving some of the constant tension of confinement. "Now I understand why Peter is always hugging Mooshie. He also misses affection." MOFFI's presence was not only comforting but also a source of fun and distraction. Anne described how she and Peter frequently talked about the cat and played with him. On one occasion, Anne and Peter discussed MOFFI's sex, which led to a series of funny and comforting events. Peter even weighed MOFFI and showed Anne the cat's male organs, which in any other circumstance might have been embarrassing but served to strengthen their bond. We played with MOFFI, talked, and slowly walked through the huge warehouse towards the door. Tragedy struck when MOFFI disappeared, leaving everyone in the annex desolate, especially Peter. Anne reported the disappearance with a note of sadness. "Have I already mentioned that MOFFI has disappeared? He simply vanished. He hasn't shown any sign of life since last Thursday. I hope he has gone to cat heaven while some cat meat lover enjoys a succulent meal at his expense." Peter is inconsolable over the disappearance. The loss of MOFFI was a hard blow for everyone, especially for Peter, who lost one of his few sources of comfort and joy in such a difficult environment. 5. The bombing attack in 1943. On July 19, 1943, Anne Frank wrote about a devastating bombing attack on the northern part of Amsterdam. The destruction was immense, with entire streets reduced to rubble. Anne described the scene with a somber tone, saying, "Entire streets lie in ruins, and it will take a long time to remove the dead from under the rubble." The magnitude of the destruction was such that hospitals were overcrowded, and there were reports of children lost in the smoldering ruins, desperately searching for their parents. This bombing brought a new dimension of terror for Anne and her companions in hiding, making it clear that even while hidden, they were not safe from the horrors of the war. Anne and the other inhabitants of the annex learned about the extent of the bombing mainly through reports from the helpers and the radio. For instance, Anne mentioned that Hank, one of the helpers, brought detailed news of the damage caused by the bombing. "I heard about people and places that were hit, and although everything is still unclear, it is evident that the destruction was enormous." Additionally, they could see columns of smoke rising on the horizon and smell the burning, making the experience even more real and frightening. Later, on July 26, 1943, Anne described another tumultuous day in the secret annex, where they were startled by sirens and bomb explosions. She described how, upon hearing the sirens, they initially did not pay much attention but soon panicked when the bombing started. I went back upstairs with her. It wasn't even 5 minutes after we got there when the bombing began, so violent that we stayed in the corridor. The bombing was so intense that the house shook, and they heard bombs falling around them. Anne clung to her escape bag, not so much to flee, but as a way to hold on to something amidst the chaos, showing how real and present the fear of being directly hit was. This series of bombings not only caused physical damage but also deeply affected the emotional state of the annex's inhabitants. Anne wrote about how everyone was nervous and agitated after the attacks, with the house full of activity and anxiety. Peter, who was on guard in the attic, and the other family members tried to stay calm, but the fear was palpable. "Oh my God, twice in one day is too much," wrote Anne, reflecting the accumulated fatigue and tension that everyone felt. These air raids brought a brutal and constant reality to life in the annex, reminding everyone that the war was always lurking, threatening to destroy their fragile refuge. 6. The romance between Anne and Peter. Anne Frank initially did not like Peter Van Pels very much when they first started living together in the secret annex. At first, she saw him as chatty and disorderly and did not understand why he did not flirt with her, considering him a bit childish and uninteresting. Anne wrote, "We hardly recognized each other now. We remember that at first we couldn't stand each other. This initial negative impression was based on their personality differences and the natural tension of being confined in a small, isolated space. Over time, however, Anne and Peter began to get to know each other better and develop a genuine friendship. Anne describes how they started sharing secrets and talking about deeper subjects. She wrote about one particular night when they were sitting on the couch, each with an arm around the other's waist, feeling an intense emotional connection. "We were sitting on the couch, each with an arm around the other's waist. Suddenly, the usual Anne disappeared, and a second Anne took her place. An Anne who is nothing but foolish and playful, but who only wants to love and be kind. These moments marked the beginning of a more intimate and emotionally significant relationship between them." The relationship between Anne and Peter evolved into something more romantic and complex, despite the difficult circumstances. Anne reported that on many nights they exchanged kisses and hugs, finding comfort and affection in each other. She reflected on the depth of her feelings and the doubts she had about whether she was acting correctly, but at the same time acknowledged her desperate need for affection and connection. Once again, the same question assails me. Is it right? Is it right to have given in so quickly, to be so fiery, so ardent and impetuous with Peter himself? There is only one answer. I have longed for so many things for so long. I am so lonely, and now I have found consolation. Even in the extreme of that situation, there was room for a typically adolescent romance. 7 Reflections on Humanity in Anne Frank's diary. Anne Frank, during her time in the secret annex, dedicated many pages of her diary to deep reflections on humanity, war, and human nature. She often questioned the meaning of so much destruction and suffering. In one of her entries, she expressed desperate perplexity. You can well imagine that we often ask ourselves desperately, what is the point of this war? Why can't people live together in peace? What is the purpose of this destruction? These words reflect her struggle to understand the hatred and violence that plagued the world around her. Anne did not blame only the leaders and politicians for the war, but also the common man. She believed there was a true urge to destroy, to kill, to murder intrinsic in humanity. In her own words, she wrote, "I don't believe that only the big, the politicians, and the capitalists are responsible for the war. Oh no, the common man is just as guilty. Otherwise, the peoples of the world would have revolted long ago." Anne saw the war as a reflection of fundamental human flaws, a flaw that could only be corrected by a significant transformation in how people think and act. Despite her youth, Anne possessed remarkable wisdom and a deep capacity for reflection. Even in the face of the horror of war, she maintained a vision of hope, and a belief in the inherent goodness of people. She wrote, "It is really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them, because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." This optimistic view of Anne about human nature, despite all evidence to the contrary, continues to inspire readers worldwide, demonstrating her resilience and unwavering hope. 8. The call from the Dutch government on the radio. During her time in the secret annex, Anne Frank listened to various radio broadcasts that brought important and sometimes inspiring news. One of the most memorable moments was when the Dutch government in exile made a call to citizens to document their experiences during the war. On March 29, 1944, Anne wrote about a radio broadcast in which Gerrit Bolkestein, a member of the Dutch government in exile, encouraged people to preserve their diaries and letters for posterity. Anne recounted. Bolkestein, a member of the parliament, spoke on a Dutch program broadcast from London and said that after the war, collections of letters and diaries should be made. Naturally, everyone immediately thought of my diary. Just imagine how interesting it would be if I were to publish the romance of the secret annex. This call had a profound impact on Anne, making her realize the importance of her diary not only as a personal outlet, but also as a historical document. She began to revise and edit her entries, hoping that her diary could one day be published and help tell the story of life in hiding under Nazi occupation. This reflection shows how Anne, even amid suffering, saw an opportunity to contribute to the collective understanding and memory of the horrors of war. 9. Anne's affection for her father. Anne Frank always had a very special and affectionate bond with her father, Otto Frank, whom she affectionately called Pim. Amid all the tensions and difficulties in the secret annex, Otto was a constant source of emotional support for Anne. In one of her diary entries, Anne expressed her deep desire for her father's true love. "I am not jealous of Margot. I have never been. I don't envy her good manners, her beauty. It's that I need and allot my father's true love. Not just because I'm his daughter, but for myself, for me, Anne." This shows how much she valued her father's love and approval. However, this relationship was not without conflicts. Anne felt that her father often did not fully understand her frustrations, especially when it came to her mother. She wrote about her difficulties in opening up to him about the problems she had with her mother. "I cling to Daddy because he is the only emotional bond I have with the family. He seems not to understand that sometimes I need to vent my sorrows against Mommy." This highlights the complexity of her emotions and the internal struggle to balance her love for him with the need to express her own pains and frustrations. Despite the challenges, Anne always recognized her father's kindness and patience. In one episode where she wrote a harsh letter that hurt her parents, Anne reflected on her behavior and how her father forgave her gently and understandingly. "And the way Daddy forgave me made me even more ashamed. He will burn the letter and is being so nice to me that it seems like he was the one who offended me." This compassionate response from Otto only reinforced the respect and admiration Anne had for him, making him not just a paternal figure but also an example of kindness and forgiveness that she aspired to follow. 10. The last entry in the diary. The last entry in Anne Frank's diary is dated Tuesday, August 1, 1944. In this entry, Anne reflects on the complexity of her feelings and the duality of her personality. She writes about how she often feels divided between two Annes, the cheerful and superficial Anne that everyone knows, and the deep and reflective Anne that is rarely shown to others. Anne mentions how, despite her jovial appearance, she often feels lonely and misunderstood. She expresses a deep desire to be seen and understood for who she really is. "I am afraid that people will discover that behind all the exterior, there is a different person." Anne reveals a remarkable introspection for her age, discussing her own flaws and the struggle to keep her deeper personality hidden. She acknowledges that superficiality is a way to protect herself from pain and disappointment. In this last entry, Anne also talks about the tension and stress of living in hiding, mentioning the constant conflicts and emotional pressure everyone faces. She describes the desire to become a better person and to overcome her own limitations, but also the difficulty of doing so under the circumstances. This last entry is a powerful testimony to Anne's resilience and emotional complexity, reflecting her dreams, fears, and the maturity she developed over the years in hiding. Anne Frank and her family were arrested by the German security police on August 4, 1944, just 3 days after this last entry in her diary. They were taken to the Westerbork transit camp and later to Auschwitz. The discovery and preservation of Anne's diary after the war were made possible by Miep Gies and Ellie Vossen, who found the notebooks in the secret annex and kept them until they could be given to Otto Frank, Anne's father, and the only surviving member of the family. After the Holocaust, Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father, was the only survivor of the group that hid in the secret annex. He was liberated from the Auschwitz concentration camp by Soviet troops on January 27, 1945. When found, Otto was in a very weakened physical state, weighing only 50 kilograms. He spent some time in the camp hospital to recover before beginning his journey back to Amsterdam. Upon returning to Amsterdam, Otto Frank discovered that he was the only surviving member of his family. His wife Edith had died in Auschwitz in January 1945, and his daughters Anne and Margot died of typhus in Bergen-Belsen in March 1945. Miep Gies and Bep Voskuil, who helped hide the Frank family, had kept Anne's writings after the arrest and gave them to Otto when he returned. Realizing the importance of his daughter's diaries, Otto decided to publish them to share Anne's story with the world. Otto dedicated the rest of his life to preserving Anne's memory and fighting against anti-Semitism. He worked tirelessly to ensure that Anne's diary was published and widely distributed, resulting in the first publication in 1947. He was also involved in the founding of the Anne Frank House Museum in Amsterdam, which became an important site of memory and education about the Holocaust. Otto Frank passed away on August 19, 1980, in Basel, Switzerland, but left a lasting legacy through his daughter's diary and his relentless efforts to keep his family's story alive.